Welcome back into the Sports Source. This segment of our show brought to you by Southeast Termite and Pest Control. Folks, it's your backyard. You should be able to enjoy it this summer without mosquitoes ruining your fun. In about an hour, Southeast Termite and Pest Control can treat your entire yard, kill 90% of your mosquito population. It's terrific. And you can do multiple treatments. If you have them out and they do it and you do the one-time treatment and they come out and do it and you still have an issue, call them. They'll come right back out and do it again. That's Southeast Termite and Pest Control. There's a reason they've been around for 46 years, people. Locally owned, locally operated, Southeast Termite and Pest Control. Okay, I want to start with a guy who ESPN has made the official voice of the SEC, Paul Feinbaum. He is, they have turned him into the guru of the league. Well, this week he did a podcast with the website Saturday Down South, and he said some things that stood out to me. Let me show you what he said here. When I hear a school like the University of Tennessee say, we're happy with 8-4, we don't want to play Alabama, and that's the fans, media are saying that, I just shake my head. Tennessee football is a major entity. If you say 8-4 is okay, we couldn't find anybody better, then you're losing. Butch Jones is very likely to survive the season short of a collapse, but how does this season play out? He has done a really good job of lowering expectations, which I think is what he wants to do. All right, my only question is, who the hell is he talking to?
Yeah,
I've got a radio where I can listen to fans here. I've got a Twitter machine on my phone here. I don't see the expectations being lowered. Am I wrong? Is he right that the expectations have been low? Now, we did discuss a couple weeks ago the whole Alabama thing, and I got a problem with anybody saying want to end that series. But in terms of lowered expectations, I haven't seen them. It seems like people are, every week we wind up having to talk about somebody calling for Butch Jones' head over something. So your thoughts on what he said? You agree with it? Disagree with it?
The first segment today was about how many people are upset that Butch Jones wouldn't call 8-4, 9-4 with the bowl win disappointing. So that's from Tennessee. How many people are upset because the head coach wouldn't acknowledge it as disappointing? That tells me that expectations are still really high.
Yeah.
If Butch Jones had been hired, say in 2002, after the great run that Philip Fulmer had, and it had this record, I can see after 4 years you could say, well, you've lowered your expectations if he's still there. But to take over the situation he did take over and be where he is, I don't see that yet as lowering expectations.
No, and especially it was year 4. That's what we talked about. Year 3 and all of the recruiting, all of the big recruiting victories you've had. No, I think expectations are higher than ever, and especially in the social media age.
Well, he made another comment in this podcast where he said, well, in year 5, you shouldn't be young. You shouldn't. And I thought, the programs don't do this. Unless you're Alabama, you don't do this. You do this.
Yeah.
You reload. That's what happens in programs. And Paul Feinbaum knows that. He is a very smart guy. I remember him as a columnist. One of the best in the league. Sharp guy. I just think he's using simpleton thinking here on complex issues to try and stir up people on his shows.
Well, to be fair to Paul, I mean, he's at SEC Media Days, and there's 14 SEC teams that he's got to talk about, and he's got to do these small capsules on each team. And as he goes through his notes, he looks at Tennessee and says, wow, here's a coach who's been on a steady plane but seems to have leveled off with 2 9-4 seasons in a row. And Paul also said during a segment I did with him, when he was talking about the University of Tennessee. So there may be a little frustration in Paul Feinbaum, the Tennessee alum, coming out.
Well, he's never shown much of that in his career, a love for the Vols. I think most Tennessee fans would view him as an Alabama guy.
He worked in the Birmingham market his entire career
for
as well.
1,000 years, yeah. It seems, though, that if you don't fire a guy for an 8-4 season, then you accept 8-4. I understand that, but Mike's right. It depends on the situation. All these situations are different, so you don't just look at it and say, 8-4, you're gone. If so, should Michigan State fire Mark D'Antonio? He didn't go 8-4 last year. He went 3-9. Should you fire him, or now is your expectation at Michigan State 3-9? See, that's bull. If you look at it, that's nonsense. If that's then Tennessee, you have a lot of people say, well, they never should have fired Philip Fulmer. According to this logic, they should have fired him sooner. Well, should have fired him in 2005 when they went 5-6 and were picked for number 3. He shouldn't have gotten any more years because you don't accept anything less than X. I just think that's nonsense. Every situation is different. If we're sitting here and Butch Jones goes 9-4 this year, 9-4 next year, I don't think he's around after next year. I don't think you can do 4 straight 8-4s at Tennessee and keep your job.
But here's part of the problem with that. If you look at the SEC last year, after Alabama, 8-4 was the best anybody was going to do in the SEC, wasn't it? I mean,
So I guess you should fire everyone.
yeah,
Everyone is
well, that's
accepting
kind of
9-4.
like what you're looking at, you know.
Well, I mean, should Florida accept 9-4? Because that was their record last year, 8-4.
That's the best anybody else is doing besides Alabama. I mean, that says
Well,
something.
we've said this before. Nick Saban changes everything. Nick Saban and his success at Alabama changes the way all these coaches are perceived. But the idea that if you don't fire your coach after an 8-4 season, then you accept 8-4 and that's your goal. That is not the goal. There are times when an 8-4 is acceptable, but it's not the goal. It's never the goal, especially at Tennessee. The goal is championships. And if you string enough 8-4s or worse together, you're gone. But considering where he took this thing over, I think Feinbaum's stirring a pot that doesn't need stirring.
And you're right. If Tennessee goes 8-4 this upcoming season, there will be a lot of people that will say that's okay. 2018, you better go win the East. That'll be the follow-up.
Yes.
Yes.
Agreed.
For the next year.
Yes.
Mike Griffith, who does the Paul Feinbaum show, very quiet in this segment. Didn't say much, except to Paul. He got to defend Paul. Time and he's a
Qualified
Tennessee
it.
fan. Tennessee fan. Yeah,
Keeping
sure,
everything
sure.
relative here.
That's fair. That's why you're here. That's why you're here for fair and balance. All right. When we come back, the SEC Network crew, they had some rough things to say about the Vols program and Butch Jones until he sat down beside them. We'll discuss. Come on back.